Can't be your Superman. Can't be your Superman. Can't be your
Superman is super woke.
And he was able to hold a mirror up to white America while also expressing pain.
It's either that or get replaced in my country. What do you want me to do?
There's so many kids that can relate to what I've been through.
Specifically, the lewd, crude, offensive, childish, slim shady character.
A million of us just like me, just like me, just don't give up like me.
Because you're a little bit more than a far-right Republican.
Hey, what can I say?
I think you can say I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am.
If I'm thinking it, I'm going to say it. I've always been that type of person.
Nowadays, I think the kids are, I don't know, more desperate or something like that, or more bored.
So I was randomly listening to Eminem this week for the first time in years during all of my humiliation rituals, also known as dasiadoesit attempts.
And it really made me ponder his role and impact
in white suburban culture. Not only did he become one of the most successful rappers of all time, but also, maybe
he was also one of those noisy, messy detours that helped delay a generation from tap dancing into extremism.
Could it be that Eminem was a part of a long line of stewards that kept white America grounded and, dare I say, humble? Was he one of the last bastions of the type of subcultures that kept mainstream white America from dipping its toes into the weird supremacy edgelordship that we see playing out right now?
Young women are more likely to murder than white.
Shut up!
People. You're a black girl. You know your roots.
For a while there, Eminem gave young white American suburban kids a mirror and a mouthpiece.
I kind of reached a point where I was just fed up.
He, like many pressure valves of suburbia before him, allowed these kids to be crude, offensive, and scream, "I'm angry," and ignored. But at the same time, he also forced them to confront the why, the real why, the true why, not the manufactured why.
Slim, I wrote you, but you still ain't calling.
That whole song is basically a warning about what happens when young, lonely white men project all their emotions onto a celebrity instead of looking inward and finding real community. If you care to pay attention, you realize that it gives us a mirrored window into parasocial meltdown, incel culture, mental health, suburban pain, and its suicidal tendencies without sitting you down to have a stern talk about the seriousness of white male radicalization. It stiff arms us into paying attention to the fact that someone in America is experiencing this in their life right now. But what happens when that mirrored window breaks? When there's no one left to check white America and offer the reminder that at the end of the day, maybe it's actually not the immigrants or the black people or the queers that are harming you. Maybe the call is coming from inside the house.
I do better in bad markets. I buy things in bad markets.
The cultural vacuum and what filled it. Up until recently, there's always been really strong subculture communities that acted as speed bumps, slowing down the mainstream just enough to remind it that not everyone fits the same mold. Welcome to 2025. We are currently in the find out phase of the internet and socials flattening those subcultures. And in their absence, MAGA has filled the void. It's been able to brand itself as the new rebellion, not because it offered creativity or expression, but because it offered identity and allegiance. When authentic outlets are disappearing by the second, it offers ready-made identities for everybody who feels left out and wants something, anything to belong to. Gen Z, specifically the Gen Z dudes, are identifying with conservatism much more often than the generation before them, which caught a lot of people by surprise, except anyone who studies cultural, social, economic patterns. When you actually listen to MAGA speak, they present themselves as the underdog.
Because if you bring 100 million votes to this man, you send this finger to the elites.
But the rebels are Republicans now. They're like, you want to be a rebel, you want to be punk rock, you want to fuck the system, you're a conservative now.
They present themselves as the anti-establishment heroes, which is actually hella confusing because they are the establishment, like deeply entrenched establishment.
And I'll go with it, and if he wants to be a dictator, then so be it.
Swamp-covered establishment.
I think part of why Kamala is getting so much support is that if Trump wins, that Epstein client list is going to become public. Yes. And some of those billionaires behind Kamala are terrified of that outcome.
Would you declassify the Epstein file?
Yeah, I would.
Release the list. Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That is an important thing.
I think the Epstein files need to be released yesterday. We need to know every single person and get the Epstein client list out immediately.
A few moments later.
Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration.
I'm going to trust my friends in the government.
That is them. They establishment so hard that they're controlling the GOP, the Supreme Court, and a pretty large chunk of both traditional and the social media space.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous.
They establishment so hard that they actually struggle to see that there's very much a difference between Homelander and Superman.
I'm going to give you one last chance to stop acting like Nazi stormtroopers.
Despite what they want to believe, MAGA has all of the features of the establishment while viewing themselves as revolutionary rebels. They do this even as they defend corporate power, elites, police brutality, religious takeover.
Country needs a dictator. You can have a vote to get to that state.
And then no more votes afterwards.
Absolutely. Wow. 100%.
And that brings me to the focus of this video, friends. We'll talk about Eminem for the most part, but in less of an Eminem appreciation video kind of way, and in more of a let's start the discourse about what happens when these subcultures start to disappear in scale and authentic intimacy kind of way. The decline of in-person white suburbia expression, whether, brought together by Eminem's rap, punk, grunge, rock, Midwest emo, screamo, the crudeness of Jackass and Beavis and Butthead, even the Tony Hawk skateboard era, how that has left a generation of suburban white kids with way less emotional cultural outlets than previous generations had. The kids are being left with a post-authenticity world, and they're being handed red hats and edgelord starter pack personalities from internet algorithms instead of through authentic expression. If you want to understand how we ended up with a generation of young MAGA acolytes who treat grievance like it's a personality trait, we need to understand two things. One, how American youth identity was built and how the internet broke that. Teenagers are a relatively new concept. They didn't always exist. Being an adolescent has always existed as a biological stage of development, but the social concept of a teenager as a separate life phase from childhood and adulthood, one with its own clothes, music, and attitude, is a cultural creation that was brought on by industrialization, child labor laws, and standardized school attendance. The first use of the word teenagers was in the early 1900s, but it didn't become popularized until marketers and advertisers identified them as a market. And once capitalism knows you exist, it knows that money can be made off of you, and thus the teenager is born. The relationship between rebellion and subcultures. With new freedom, visibility, and disposable income, we now have the American teenagers who were no longer just workers in training. They were consumers, and consumers need culture. I buy, therefore I am. Teenage subcultures begin to fully emerge in the 1940s and 50s as expressions of identity and defiance. The Pachuco movement, birthed by Mexican-American kids, bebop and jazz scenes from black kids, later on became mods, punks, grunge kids, hip-hop heads of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
You're going to reduce us to a subculture and then not accurately name the subculture?
The scenes were defined by dress codes, slang, music, and politics, and were born out of very specific places: grimy venues, dance halls, record stores, basements, community centers, and garages. They were a safer place for kids who were discovering their identities, who wanted to be a part of something or wanted the solidarity of a common belief system and realized that they didn't or wouldn't fit into mainstream white America. So not only was the setting different, and by different, I mean not a screen, but they were shaped by material conditions, poverty, alienation, racism.
Just a routine check. You're always routine checking us. Do you check on the guy that have clubs over in Beverly Hills or Brentwood?
He's an excitable guy, officers. His mother really did give us the furniture, honest.
That's all we wanted to know. That's the trouble with you Pachuco kids. You've always got a chip on your shoulder.
Queerness, life in the suburbs, but they provided a way for young people to express their identity through music, dress, and the ideologies that held it all together. The Zoot Suit is actually a perfect example of this because it started out as a form of high-style rebellion. The long coats, the baggy pants, the gold chains. But for a lot of people, it symbolized a resistance to wartime assimilation, especially among Black, Mexican, and Filipino youth. But in 1943, this form of resistance was met with violence. Once the mainstream culture had their insecurities preyed upon and fed their very own 1940s form of rage bait, they went and decided that Zoot Suits were now going to be a sign of degeneracy, and they deemed them unpatriotic. So you have white U.S. servicemen who are angry about the suits, who've now been hyped up by racist press, attacking young men in the streets, ripping off their clothes, beating them, dragging them from bars, from theaters.
They're different. Why can't they be like you and me? They need to be like us. And therefore, we're going to force our identity onto their identity.
And all throughout history, this type of white suburbia insecurity is not It's not an anomaly. It's not a one-off. It's been the masked Scooby-Doo villain behind some of the ugliest chapters in American history. Lynchings, Tulsa, Rosewood, Zoot Suit riots, Japanese internment camps. It doesn't matter because the insecurity doesn't change. It always shows up whenever mainstream whiteness feels threatened or feels panicked by confidence or culture or control from someone else.
And now hysteria too sweeps the United States. Make America safe for Americans. Why? Because there is a bloody revolution still raging in Russia, and a panicky fear of alien doctrines spreads throughout the land. All aliens are suspect, innocent and guilty alike. Raids, arrests, riots, civil liberties. So's your old man. The Republic is in danger, many seem to think. What to do? SOS.
This is not new. But what is new is the algorithm, which does not just reflect or mirror cultural trends. It twists them and it amplifies and it weaponizes them. The type of fear-mongering that used to take months or years to spread because it only had a set amount of channels through gossip, movies, propaganda pamphlets, that level of influence would take so much longer, but now it can happen in seconds. It takes one search, one click, one video for you to be neck deep in white Grievance cosplay, in MAGA merch drops, in alpha male podcasts, where we have fully grown adults trauma dumping on kids about their failed relationships and barely coded supremacy. The rage that used to be isolated locally is now on a loop, and it escalates and it sells ad space, and it's scalable and it's monetizable, and probably more dangerous than all of that, it's profitable. You can fast forward to as early as 2014 and you already have journalists talking about the reality that subcultures were very quickly disappearing, and we'd had already started to see a shift towards curated aesthetics or cores, which is basically just a watered down, insincere version of those youth subcultures. It's a Polaroid. MySpace used to be a launch pad for scene bands and for local music discovery, and then that gave birth to TikTok, which is now a place where music is just basically background noise for going viral, or if you're already playing off a trend. It's not the main reason for gathering or building community. Yes, we may be communally joining on a trend together, but it's still very much a silo for the most part. We experience so much less together because the audience is fragmented. If you're ever curious about what this looks like in the wild, a solid example of this like painfully surface level engagement, look no further than this Steve Lacy concert where he's asking his audience to sing the next lyrics of his hyper viral song, and they can't.
Yeah. Don't embarrass me. Y'all still in the first verse twice.
When I watch that video, I can't help but feel a sadness that we are overfed and at the very same time starving. The space that subcultures offered a lot of times was very messy, was very problematic, but it gave a space to process so much of the human experience by allowing kids to scream and cry and feel with others. Think about all these specific ingredients that went into something like hip hop or emo being born. All of the human things that had to happen. Once social media started replacing in-person gathering spaces, the ability to discover and build culture organically, it's been replaced by your algorithmic exposure to what's already trending, what other people have already deemed worthy of being listened to. What was at one point in time very different and very local and very rebellious has turned into a globally distributed aesthetic template that's optimized for the singular purpose of mass appeal and going viral. Posers are a thing of the past because you can now get the aesthetics of the subculture without the communal lineage or the understanding of said subculture. And it's creating a fragmented and a lot of times contradictory identity.
Can we please leave politics out of metal, punk, rock, and grunge?
I love Nirvana. Name 3 Nirvana songs right now.
It's because emo at this point just becomes eyeliner and thrifted studded belts when it's stripped of its Midwest working class roots. Grunge just becomes about bass guitars, flannel, and nihilism, but with no Nirvana, no heroin epidemic, no Gen X despair and rejection of Reagan-era conservatism.
Poisoned out there. You know, the air in Utopia is poisoned. You know, the final joke, so...
We're not all grooving on the same vibes anymore. Everybody's grooving on different vibes. Ugly vibes.
It's the white suburbia version of wanting the rhythm without the blues. Kyle Chaka writes about this evolution in Filter World, how we now live in a world where the content that we consume and the expressions that we mimic are shaped a lot less by community and watching people, and more so by software encoding. Side note, I do want to point out that this isn't new by any means. Subcultures being flattened isn't new to the digital era. I actually talk about this a lot in my Why Art No Longer Reflects Reality video, how a lot of the cultural events like white suburban insecurity, monetization in mass media has basically trampled artistic rebellion all throughout the 20th century, which also I may need to update that video soon because I don't know if y'all have been noticing, but the art has been arting, okay? The art has been reflecting reality lately. The artists are arting again, which is a really big deal. And it's a sign that people are really beginning to understand that everything can't be palatable to the algorithm. Everything can't be marketable because you risk silencing yourself. You risk self-censorship. You risk selling your soul. But yeah, it's not the first time and it won't be the last time, especially with the rise of AI.
I understand thousands of people are being replaced by these electronic brains.
But it is very real that the internet's global reach and speed has made that process that much more intense. And it's very quickly erasing alternative cultures and giving birth to a kind of algorithmic mono internet culture monster. Cultures change. That's always going to happen. When these subcultures fade, or they're stripped of meaning and nothing equally cathartic rises to replace them, we actually start seeing answers to the questions of what happens when there's no bands to start, when there's no basement shows to attend, when there's no radical zines to make. For a growing number of white kids, the outlet has become ideological instead of expressive. The underlying suburban rage didn't just vanish, it just got rerouted. And instead of hearing cleaning out my closet, we are getting 4chan fed great replacement theory and, you know, casual racism.
You're nothing but a slave.
Part 1. Eminem, Accidental Class Consciousness and Licensed Transgression. Eminem was one of the last huge mainstream figures who gave young white kids a glimpse of class consciousness without ever having to use those words. He gave them a way to feel seen and feel proud that wasn't built on the idea of supremacy.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring.
He embodied white poverty, dysfunction, addiction, and generational rage without hiding it behind white America respectability politics, and made it clear that a lot of white people are often also victims of white America. He said things to his audience to remind them that there was an inside club that they still were not a part of.
I'm a piece of the white trash, I say it proudly.
He called out the double standard of white outrage. He didn't use academic language. He didn't talk about whiteness as a power structure, but he showed it by being a white guy who knew two things: that there was a privilege he was aware of, where he knew his whiteness had worked to his benefit.
Things about expressing it to black music, so self-victory. If you sit to get myself working.
He was aware of that. He didn't downplay that, while simultaneously holding the understanding that his version of whiteness still wasn't safe up against white America. So for, a blip in time, Eminem gave white working class young people a way to separate themselves from hegemonic whiteness, think default whiteness, and working class whiteness. The license for crudity. In the late 90s and early 2000s, crude language, swearing, over-the-top trolling, slurs, they were used, but they were used a lot less like a weapon and more like a cultural outlet. We were filled to the brim with shows and movies that are way more offensive than anything I've seen today. Things like Jackass, which celebrated an anti-authority chaos and total rejection of traditional masculinity and composure. A whole wave of media that leaned on offensiveness, but it wasn't out of malice. It was more so out of absurdity. When you look back at things like The Dictator, Borat, even Team America, which takes shots at American exceptionalism and, the massively popular Fight Club. If any of those were made today, it probably would be called anti-American. It definitely would get heat from the right today. I'm willing to put money down. That's how far we have shifted.
Peaceful protests do not include blocking entrances, blocking highways, lobbing bricks, destroying property, setting fires.
Buildings are empty. Security, maintenance, all our people.
Not killing anyone, man. We're setting them free.
These things weren't a celebration of cruelty or bullying or anything like that. They were chaotic and juvenile, and a lot of times they were self-deprecating. The humor was gross. It was over the top, but it wasn't targeted. It wasn't targeted. It wasn't about pushing an idea of dominance or superiority. More often than not, you know, it was poking fun at power, at decorum, and authority figures. You have Eminem, who stood right in the middle of this balance. When he raps lines like,
It's a million of us just like me, just like me, just don't give up like me, just like me, walk, talk, and act like me.
that captures the exact dynamic. He gave white suburban kids permission to express frustration and alienation, but also forced them to look inward. His transgressions were licensed, not just because of his whiteness, but because they functioned within a cultural process. Crudeness, the idea of being crude or being offensive, it wasn't yet turned into an identity. It wasn't yet politicized. If anything, it was more of a release valve to rebel without, aligning with fascism, raging against the machine. I was watching Little Nicky the other day and it just made me like, ugh. Can you believe that we used to make fun of Hitler instead of gushing about being his biggest fan on Jubilee or something like that? Like, we actually used to make fun of Hitler. My, how far we have fallen. This doesn't mean that Eminem gets a free pass, by the way. Quite the opposite. He pissed off a lot of people on the left, too, at the time, and he was also seen as a serious threat. Politicians called him dangerous. Parents were boycotting his music. Congress brought his lyrics into hearings. Liz Cheney was on Eminem's bumper. On his bumper. But when you go back and you actually clock in and you pay attention to these things, you start to realize the outrage wasn't about the content itself. It was more about who was allowed to say what and what it meant when poor, angry white kids started identifying more with Eminem's reality of being white than with the mainstream respectable whiteness.
When did you start talking like Eminem?
Way before Eminem, you have artists like 2 Live Crew, NWA, you have Zapp and Roger. They had already been faced with censorship and criminalization for being too sexual, for being too explicit, for being too unapologetically not white America. But the difference was when non-white artists pushed boundaries, they were criminalized or actually censored. But when Eminem did it, he was debated because what he represented scared white America in a way that the Black artists probably never could. He was too close to home. White suburban parents are much less bothered by their child being a bully, by being racist, unprompted. That's a rite of passage for them for some weird reason that should probably be studied. I'm just gonna say it, I feel like racism is a mental illness. But instead, they're actually much more worried about their children aligning with a different version of whiteness. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the differences of how crudity, being crude, being offensive was used then versus what it's morphed into now that we have the sociopathic ability to monetize rage in a way that wasn't available before. And if we keep on the same trend, it'll only get worse because what whiny comedians fail to understand is
Cancel culture. Hey, cancel culture. Oh, cancel culture. Cancel culture shit.
Is offensiveness without class consciousness and self-awareness has given birth to dopamine-addicted edgelords.
Do you think Black people should be allowed to use the self-checkout section at the grocery store?
What? I'm going to rant for a second. I know that this is hard for a lot of people to believe, but I will let you in on a little secret. It's not that everyone is so offended by your Black joke. It's that it wasn't funny. And it wasn't funny because you lack the creativity, self-awareness, and contextual range for it to be actually funny, okay? There, I said it. Okay, I said it.
I'm against cancel culture. Thank you. That's my impression of a shit comic trying to get on Rogan.
Supreme Leader, I took the liberty of hiring some extra security. This is Mr. Clayton.
Admiral General, I am here for your protection 24/7. But in the interest of full disclosure, I have to say, I hate Arabs.
Well, that's fine because I'm not an Arab.
Well, you're all Arabs to me. The blacks, the Jews, those blue tree-hugging queers and Avatar. In fact, anyone from outside of America is technically an Arab.
Oh, be quiet.
Why are you guys so anti-dictator? Imagine if America was a dictatorship. You could let 1% of the people have all the nation's wealth. You could help your rich friends get richer by cutting their taxes and bailing them out when they gamble and lose. You could ignore the needs of the poor for healthcare and education. Your media would appear free, but would secretly be controlled by one person and his family. You could wiretap phones. You could torture foreign prisoners. You could have rigged elections. You could lie about why you go to war. You could fill your prisons with one particular racial group and no one would complain. You could use the media to scare the people into supporting policies that are against their interests. I know this is hard for you Americans to imagine, but please try.
Despite the latest rebranding attempts, it's actually not edgy. It's not cool. It's actually super cringe, especially without the relevant cultural context that made it funny in the past.
Marlon logs all of you? Yeah, but he's black. No, he's not. Oh, he's not? Oh, he's not? Are you seeing his parents? Or what? Oh, yeah, I think he's just really bad. He logs his too with you.
I have no way to get people to pay attention to me, so let me just pull out the trusty racist joke card. Like, what? Couldn't be me. Today, though, that license to transgress has shifted right along with the Overton window. So what used to be a messy, cathartic tool for rebellion, trolling, is now a coded gateway for radicalization. They made it gross. They made it so gross. Trolling used to be about testing boundaries, or in Eminem's case, making a statement against the established default, making white people sit in the discomfort of his white reality. Now it's about recruiting others into rigid, contradictory, hateful ideologies. The person that called something retarded or gay in the 90s wasn't doing it to assert themselves politically the way that a person might be today. It was just a thing that you said. When we learned that it wasn't nice, we chilled out. That's it. That's it. The key difference is that then crudeness and offensiveness were used to process discomfort with society, and now it's being used to project that discomfort onto scapegoats. Part 2, the privilege paradox, then versus now. Early 2000s, uneasy understanding. At the risk of sounding nostalgic, there was a brief and strange time in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s where it seemed like white America was more willing to acknowledge that they knew what was up, or at least that they had an understanding of privilege and power, even if they didn't yet have like the readily available vocabulary, PC language for it just yet. Disclaimer, this is not to say that the world was kumbaya and all the isms were solved. Not even close, okay? Ist and ick things still happen. But in terms of the conversations being had, all you have to do is look at the media and pop culture from the time. They're like a time capsule to see that those conversations were very similar, but somehow different in terms of receptiveness in a lot of cases.
Remember the days when couples fought because the husband didn't want his wife to work, but she wanted her own career? Well, surprise, surprise. Today, there is a new argument brewing. More and more women are saying that it's too much, that they're not super women after all, and that they want to stay at home. Or husbands want their wives earning paychecks.
You've probably felt this before. If you've ever looked back and watched something that was made in like the 80s or the 90s or early 2000s, and you're like, wow, that cast was so diverse. What happened? You know, even extremely popular movies from just a few years earlier, like Trading Places, starring Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, showed us that you could be crude and socially conscious at the same time, and it's not something to reject outright.
You lost everything overnight like your character in the film. What would you do?
I still have my Ontario cartage license, so I'll always be able to drive truck. I know how to run a bulldozer. You know, I'll always get by. See, but my character, he was brought up with money and wealth and the feeling that he was genetically superior and socially superior. And when he loses everything, of course, he has nothing to fall back on but the good graces of Ophelia, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. So I don't have any such person. I would have to fall back on my own talents as a manual laborer and blue-collar worker, I think.
For the peeps who haven't seen Trading Places, it's basically like a white, wealthy finance bro and a homeless black con man are the subjects of a bet, and the bet is to test how each of the men will turn out when their life circumstances are swapped with each other. They don't know that they're in the bet, but someone else is betting on them and like screwing up one's life and elevating the other. And it's just a very interesting conversation that's being had without all of the fanfare of it being like woke. Or when you watch something like Face Off today and you see that there's like a black woman police department head, you realize that both of those would probably immediately be labeled woke, even though it's just normal representation. And I feel that because white people were understanding that there was a bigger picture that they fit into, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. At the very least, I feel like it wasn't an outright denial of reality. Okay, so we're at more of an uneasy recognition. I also have a theory that this is a huge part of the reason why millennials are so delusional. As somebody who grew up, you know, half analog, half digital, half low income, half suburbia, it's not really hard to see, at least from like a media and cultural perspective, that millennials did have reason to believe and to imagine a future that looked different. Information that we were being pumped full of had us real delusional about the future, okay? We were real hopeful, tragically optimistic. I feel like millennials are the tragically optimistic generation. Truly. Side note, as I spend more time in activism spaces, I consistently meet well-meaning white people who will ask me what they can do to be a good ally. They'll always ask me a variation of that question. And it always makes me a little bit sad for them because I realize that in that moment, they don't realize that their own culture has been erased and minimized in favor of upholding the perfect ideology of white America. So much so that they think that being an ally is a new and bold position instead of like a very real active reality of many white Americans who have never fit into the default or just were not okay with the things that they were seeing or how they saw other people being treated. It's as though a lot of white people don't realize that they don't need to ask minorities how to be good allies. They should be able to look within their own communities. There have always been white allies in existence who have been good allies. In fact, some white allies ended up paying the ultimate price for their allyship. But the actual reason that they don't know about them is because, like the histories of so many marginalized groups, their history has been erased to maintain the appearance of white unification and narrative control. It's happening to you too. Viola Liuzzo was a young white mom of 5, also from Detroit, Michigan, who was murdered by 4 KKK members solely for her role in driving black people to vote in the Selma marches. Vernon Dahmer was a wealthy businessman, so clock that, okay? You have someone outside of the working class. So we got some cross-class solidarity happening here. He was killed when his house was firebombed the night after he dared to offer to pay the poll taxes for the black people who couldn't afford the fee required to vote, which honestly goes to show how even being a white woman or that even having money won't save you when you are on the wrong side of white America. When you take a step back and you look at people like Brian Deneke, who was a punk in Texas who was killed when he was purposefully run over by a football jock and his gang. Okay, the jocks have been targeting the punks for simply looking different. You start to realize that, oh, okay, it's not harmless kids taking things too far. Brian Deneke should instead be seen as yet another victim of white America's intolerance. And by try that, we mean exist. Just exist differently. The kid who killed Brian Deneke was sentenced to probation despite eyewitness testimony of his purposeful intent to kill Deneke, because even though they were both white, the punk's life was seen as less valuable than the rising Christian football star's life. All of these people represent countless white people who stood apart from the dominant culture and paid the ultimate price. Contrary to popular belief, police also kill and deploy brutality on white citizens, but you would not know that. And it's not because the media doesn't care about white people. Okay, they very much do. It's not a lack of coverage that is doing it. The lack of coverage happens because white America is excommunicating those people. The same way it excommunicates anything outside of the stereotypical, the same way that it marks any brutality those white people faced at the hands of their public servants as deserved, instead of a wider issue that could actually be solved for. Their deaths should be a reminder of how white America punishes its own when they step out of line as a living, breathing structure that disciplines whoever rejects its norms and stands against the mainstream. 2020, active denial, the kids are alt-right. And the 2020s have been marked by active denial. The shift we see today represents a massive cultural departure, where earlier artists like Eminem acknowledged their privilege and at the same time called out their exclusion from elite circles. Today's white people go out of their way to convince you that everyone has the same experience. There's no such thing as white privilege has become a rallying cry, a complete reversal from where we were. Right-wing media, YouTube rabbit holes, and grievance-driven political narratives have been spoon-fed to an entire generation since birth. At certain times throughout history, white rebellion often meant punching up, okay, at systems, at parents, at politicians, at greedy billionaires, at unfair employers.
The labor movement introduces a new form of strategy. Industrial plants build up arsenals of gas bombs, machine guns, and rifles.
Today, rebellion has just started to mean casual punching down.
It's like they won. Trans people are frightened. They have no ability to get health care anymore, and they're afraid of being alive and have no freedom left. So that's done. When do you stop with the jokes?
The awareness gap is so much wider, where Eminem's generation had a much more intuitive grasp of systemic advantage. The current generation's dominant reaction is defensiveness, and they're being gassed up by media ecosystems that will frame any attempt at reflection as weakness or woke indoctrination. Chat, is empathy woke? Is empathy woke now? The challenge comes in because we're not just dealing with ignorance at that point, we're dealing with cultural amnesia. Way too short of a time ago, even mainstream music, movies, even on Oprah.
It's not working. If she dies now,
Such generalization, such generalization.
That cultural memory is now buried under waves of denial and performative victimhood. Whether we realize it or not, we were once a lot closer to self-aware rebellion, but we've lost our willingness to engage with and sit with certain truths. Because of that disengagement with truth, that we've lost the ability to reflect honestly. It becomes very difficult to communicate with people when you have two different versions of reality that you are operating off of. The conversation has gone from, yes, I benefit from this, and that's kind of messed up, to how dare you say I benefit at all? How dare you question me only taking credit for achievements and no atrocities? How dare you? So this specific shift is what's led to an even bigger overcorrection. And probably the worst part about the overcorrection is that the overcorrection itself isn't coming as a result of a lived reality or real day-to-day interactions. It's now coming down as a result of grooming by way of algorithms from capitalism trying to sell you an identity, from billionaires who are posing as public servants despite never serving people publicly in any capacity, while dangling culture war carrots in front of their citizens to grift.
So there's a lot of opportunity, I find, in the bad times.
We're being grifted. We're being grifted while they engage in class warfare and fearmonger their way into a level of wealth that the average American will never comprehend. Our society is so sick. It's so funny because I always hear people from Europe talk about how Americans make everything about race, but I feel like they really choose to ignore the fact that our society is so sick that someone can loudly, with their full chest,
Black person right now.
And that's the injustice. Okay. Part 3. The MAGA substitution. Manufactured grievance versus authentic rebellion. So the release valve is gone. MAGA and grievance politics have filled the void left by strong, expressive, crude, rebellious subcultures that were born around boundary-pushing art like Eminem's. MAGA rallies and online debates replaced mosh pits and basements. And the trip part about what's happening is that is actually way more dangerous than garage bands ever were. Once upon a time, working-class whites, might have questioned their place in the system through music and through media. But today, a lot of them vote against their own economic interests in order to retain a sense of group identity based on race and cultural status. Red hats have replaced band t-shirts and rally chants substitute for song lyrics. What we are watching play out in front of us today has absolutely nothing to do with grassroots rebellion. I feel like I have to repeat that point. MAGA is not a grassroots rebellion. It is engineered grievance. It's a carefully orchestrated transformation of manufactured grievance. It has nothing to do with authentic rebellion. So I talk a lot about think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, spending decades studying the emotional landscape and the moods of disaffected white Americans, and then crafting narratives that feel rebellious.
That we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
They feel like you're a part of something, but they're actually set up to serve elite interests, aka state-sponsored revolution. There are now MAGA-specific think tanks like the Center for Renewing America and the America First Policy Institute. There are now MAGA recruiting and training organizations like American Moment and MAGA incubators like the Conservative Partnership Institute. All of those entities are aimed at not only bolstering the Trump cause, but strategizing how to sustain it after he's gone. The America First Policy Institute right now is openly working on a 100-year plan for Trumpism, and they're aiming to permanently root these politics in the American psyche. That is the goal. Permanent Trumpism. This is an America where doublespeak will be common, where the truth is optional, where cities and states that fight back against gerrymandering can be sued because not discriminating against anyone else is now seen as discrimination against white people. Instead of music, kids are being fed reactionary YouTube clips before they even know how to read. They are being groomed by the algorithm and other people who also can't read. So make no mistakes, when you see JD Vance on podcasts, it's not because he had an interest in that podcast and decided, oh, hey, I want to go talk to these guys. There is a pipeline from think tank strategy to street level culture war. This is so far from organic rebellion. It's political strategy that is running a cosplay as cultural understanding. That's the only way that I can think to describe it. Cultural cosplay. When Eminem was most provocative, he still somehow embodied class consciousness, a poor white person aware of both his struggles and his privilege, still being conscious of the world around him. The landscape today has been purposefully hijacked.
We all know the woke stuff went too far, but the answer isn't going too far the other way. It's not a bad thing to have a little compassion for people. It's not a bad thing to care a little for the environment.
Hijacked, it's not a natural evolution. This is a hijacking. In a post-Trump world, the incitement of white grievance is going to be the strongest strategy, and they're going to run this play into the ground.
Just to get her aggression out. I feel very violent. I feel like I'm doing something I'm good at.
The crude language and offensiveness and vibe of the 90s and the early 2000s that once, joined people together has been hijacked to just casual racism and dog whistles. And if you dare say anything about me being casually racist to you, you're the problem, not me. The baby that these grievance politics have given birth to is a complete inversion. You now have personal grievances being elevated to the level of political struggles against a perceived evil for some reason only lives in the lives of other people who are ruining America and has nothing to do with the political or economic systems that are hollowing our country from the inside. Nothing to do with that. It's because the bathrooms aren't gendered. And probably the true tragedy of it all, the strategy feels just as warm and fuzzy as being a part of something bigger than yourself. It mimics what is found in authentic spaces, except it's just truly top-down manipulation. You're running the risk of missing out on building real community. You're being filled up, but you're still starving. So in the absence of galvanizing subcultures, white America becomes the default culture and anything outside of that becomes a threat. It waits like a low-grade fever in the background, ready to reabsorb disaffected white kids the moment they are confronted with pushback, oftentimes for their own behavior. Oh, they hit you back? Come on home. That home, of course, being white America's suburban insecurity. The same white kid who used to blast Lose Yourself on a burnt CD is now the kid who shares Charlie Kirk clips, ranting loudly online about being silenced. Authentic identity and authentic rebellion rooted in class, art, and collective expression has been replaced and repackaged into white grievance identity politics. Only now, the focus is no longer about challenging power, questioning authority. It's about who can comply best, who can be most loyal to the system.
He could stand on the front steps of the White House and commit murder, and I'm with him.
And an obsession about reclaiming a fictional past, from fuck the system to build the wall. And so that's where we are today, edgelording ourselves into authoritarianism. Part 4, What We Owe the Real Slim Shady. Eminem didn't save America, but for a while, maybe he kept white America humble. He was one of the last cultural pressure valves for suburban angst. A noisy, offensive, unfiltered force who gave white kids somewhere to put their rage before that rage curdled into grievance. I actually don't think that it's too far of a reach to come to the conclusion that despite crime dropping overall, since we started actively keeping track in the 70s, that the decline of these cultural outlets and the flattening of subcultures by way of social media has led to a rise in mass violence and increased online radicalization in the 2020s. I made a video about a year or two ago as someone who used to be a huge fan of Eminem and growing up, where, I was critiquing Eminem's offensiveness, his obsession with not being cancelable and how he just needed to grow up and be more mature and yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. But doing a re-listen of his old stuff made me realize that maybe I was a little bit too quick to criticize the crude, offensive rawness of Slim Shady. In hindsight, maybe I was too hard on him. It served a purpose. That licensed transgression was holding back something much, much worse. He definitely wasn't perfect. He was flawed, problematic, offensive.
Why are you so mad about body positivity?
Well, you're so mad about body positivity. What the fuck is body positivity?
Like people feeling okay with their bodies.
Oh, you mean fat power?
Okay. BBL Slizzy.
Eminem walked so rage baiters today could run, truly. But by giving white America both a mirror and a confession booth, Mr. Mathers forced an uncomfortable confrontation with internalized prejudice, insecurity, and pain. That confrontation and vulnerability, truly, think about the vulnerability required to put out a track like Cleaning Out My Closet. That confrontation and vulnerability, however messy, is necessary. It's crucial. And we can feel the absence today. The absence is deeply felt.
Watching him play to his base that thinks that he cares about them, and it's actually the people that he cares about least. If you're talking about his core being, a majority white middle class, what I don't understand is how in the fuck do you feel like you relate to a billionaire who has never known struggle his entire fucking life? I will say this, he talks a good one.
It's the Eminems of the world who hold a mirror up to white America. They force white kids to confront their shadow selves, to see how whiteness function in the world, not as a neutral default, but as an identity with power and consequence. What's left now is unexamined rage. That's what's filled the void. Not solidarity, not rebellion, but resentment. How dare you remind me of my manners? How dare you actually want freedom and justice for all, dressed up as patriotism and counterculture? Eminem wasn't a revolutionary hero, but his art was a release valve, and today that valve is gone. I feel like it's also worth mentioning that Slim Shady was also a persona, and we've evolved into a place where the line between person and persona is blurred. What was once just a persona has become the sum of people's entire personality, and it has given birth to a spectacle-addicted troll nation.
Hell yeah, you was the hard R in the group chats.
It's actually not an accident that we ended up with a spectacle-addicted troll president.
There's a subculture and a sub-media that talks and keeps things going for entertainment purposes rather than for the flow of information.
Our only hope is class consciousness. Coda, the tragic optimist's path forward. The solution isn't nostalgia. We can't just bring back Eminem. It wouldn't do anything anyway. South Park is trying to give it a run for its money, but I honestly don't think that it's possible to out-troll the trolls. But we shall see. My fingers are crossed. What we can be doing is rebuilding spaces where anger is channeled into community, into innovation, into art, and a love of something and not just a hate of something.
It saved my life. It gave me a purpose, which I was sorely lacking in my life, and it was damaging who I was and to the point where I was going to be nothing.
Very least. We also can't just blame kids for turning to the wrong outlets. We have to ask ourselves what were and are the right ones, what happened to them and what would they look like in this time and space with our specifically unique challenges. What would they look like now? Not nostalgia, evolution. I feel like way too often we hear things like, the kids will always find something, they'll figure it out, it's just a phase. Maybe, but what if the algorithm doesn't let them find anything else? Looking forward, the work should be put into rebuilding authentic subcultures, the kind that thrive in real rooms, not in comment sections.
Don't be fooled by the internet. It's cool. It's cool to get on the computer, but don't let the computer get on you. Cool to use the computer. Don't let the computer use you. You all saw The Matrix. There's a war going on. The battlefield's in the mind, and the prize is the soul. Be careful.
That means creating outlets outside of the feed, unions, do-it-yourself, real music scenes, mutual aid, meetups, zines in coffee shops, firearm safety groups, cooking circles, running and exercise crews, run anything where people are building something together working on something together instead of just consuming outrage. Are you an asset in the revolution? At every opportunity, we should be ripping the mask off the reality that movements like MAGA are deeply aligned with establishment money and power. They are bankrolled by the same elites that they claim to fight, and they masquerade as counterculture while wielding class warfare right in front of us. Make no mistake, what you see happening when billionaires make healthcare decisions while purposefully crashing the economy, while removing consumer protections, while building, $200 million gold ballrooms, class warfare is in full effect and they are winning. That is what's happening. They're winning. The tragic optimist in me believes that there is hope if we take lessons from what worked in the past and we combine it with our strengths of today. I believe that rebellion and cohesive awareness can exist, and I believe that that can be shaped into art or targeted activism. White America has already shown us repeatedly what happens when it as a culture goes unchecked and it's stripped of critique. It becomes a culture that is close to the edge, and it's not of rebellion, but of regression. It's also just pattern recognition to be aware of the objective reality that white America unchecked all too quickly becomes white America unhinged. And if you are offended by that factual reality, then maybe the next question is, why did it strike a nerve?
And that is why the best choice to be the next Superman is Eminem.
That is all that I have for you today, friends, and I will see you in the next one.